The studio lights blazed down on Rachel, making her sweat under the hot stage lights. Her heart pounded in her chest as the camera zoomed in on her face. She was sitting on the famous Truth Hour talk show, the show that had promised to reunite her with the woman who had abandoned her when she was just a baby. Rachel had spent years looking for her mother, piecing together the small bits of information she had. Now, she was finally going to confront her, live on national television. The moment was supposed to be a healing one, a reunion that would provide answers to a lifetime of questions. But as the audience held its breath, watching Rachel, the doors at the back of the studio swung open. A woman walked through, her figure tall and strong, her eyes cold and unflinching. For a moment, Rachel froze, her body shaking. She knew that face. The face of the woman she had seen in old photographs, the woman who had vanished from her life all those years ago. Rachel stood up, her voice breaking. "Mom?" she whispered, her hands trembling. The woman didn't move. Instead, she locked eyes with Rachel, her face expressionless. There was no smile, no warm embrace, only a cold, calculating stare. The studio fell silent. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Could this really be her mother? She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this. The years of longing, of searching, had all led to this cold, indifferent woman standing in front of her. The host, James Davis, leaned in with an excited grin. "Rachel, this is the moment. Please, ask her everything you need to. She's here. The truth is finally about to be revealed." His voice was full of excitement, but Rachel felt nothing but confusion and fear. Her mother took a step forward, her voice cold as ice. "You want the truth, Rachel? Well, here it is," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the air. "The truth is, I never wanted you. I had to leave. It was never about you. It was about me and the choices I made." Rachel's heart shattered. Those words, so simple, yet so cruel, struck her like a physical blow. The years of wondering why her mother left, the years of searching for answers, all felt pointless in that moment. She had wanted a reunion, but this was the last thing she had expected. The audience gasped, and a murmur of disbelief spread across the room. Rachel could barely breathe. Her whole body went numb. How could the woman she had dreamed of finding for so long be so heartless? "Is this the truth?" Rachel choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The woman nodded, her expression never changing. "I did what I had to do. You were a mistake I couldn't fix." The silence in the room was deafening. Rachel could feel the weight of the woman's words pressing down on her chest. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand an explanation. But instead, she felt a cold wave of reality wash over her. This was the truth. The mother she had longed for, the mother she had hoped would offer some form of love or regret, had turned out to be someone who had never cared about her at all. Rachel took a shaky breath, feeling the eyes of the entire nation on her. This was supposed to be the moment of closure, but it felt like her world was collapsing around her. What was she supposed to do now? The truth was more than she could bear, but it was the truth nonetheless. James Davis, seeing the pain in Rachel's eyes, tried to intervene, but it was clear that Rachel wasn't listening. Her mind was racing, the words of her mother echoing in her ears. It was too much to process. The tears she had held back for so long began to spill over, falling down her cheeks in silent streams. She didn't care that the cameras were rolling, didn't care about the millions of people watching her. All she cared about was the woman standing in front of her, the woman who had given birth to her, the woman who had never loved her. Just as Rachel was about to say something, to ask more questions, something unexpected happened. The woman who had been so cold, so distant, suddenly let out a laugh. A harsh, bitter laugh that seemed to echo through the studio. "You think I'm your mother?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Well, you're wrong. You've been chasing a lie. I'm not the one who abandoned you. Someone else did." Rachel froze. What? Someone else? Could it be possible? Had she been chasing the wrong person all these years? The audience fell completely silent, and James Davis looked on, wide-eyed. The tension in the room was unbearable. Rachel's heart pounded as she tried to process this new revelation. Was this woman really not her mother? Who was she then? Why had she come here? To confront her, to tell her such devastating truths. What was the real story behind her abandonment? Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Her mind was spinning, and she had no idea what to say, what to ask next. The truth she thought she was getting now seemed like a lie, and everything she had known about her past was starting to crumble. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, the woman pointed toward the door. "You want to know the truth?" she hissed. "Then go find your real mother. She's still alive. And she's the one who left you." Rachel's world spun. What was she supposed to believe now? Was everything she had known about her past just a fantasy? Could the woman in front of her really be telling the truth? Or was this just another cruel game? Before she could say anything more, the screen cut to black, and the show's theme music played, signaling the end of the segment. The audience was left in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. Rachel stood frozen, her heart racing as the reality of what she had just heard began to sink in. Her world had just been turned upside down, and she had no idea what to do next. The moment the lights dimmed and the show wrapped up, Rachel felt as if she had been plunged into darkness. The applause from the studio audience felt hollow, as though they, too, didn't know how to react to what had just happened. Rachel's head spun, and her heart ached. Was this really the end of her search? Was this woman truly not her mother? Behind the scenes, people rushed around, breaking down the set and preparing for the next segment, but Rachel stood frozen in place. She couldn't bring herself to move. She felt like the walls were closing in on her, and all she could hear were the words her so-called mother had spoken. "You've been chasing a lie." She wanted to scream, to lash out, but the words felt stuck in her throat. James Davis, the host, approached her cautiously. He had a sympathetic look on his face, though it barely registered to Rachel. His voice was gentle. "Rachel, I know that was a lot to take in, but you don't have to do this alone. You have support. We're here to help you, every step of the way." Rachel's eyes flickered toward him, but her mind was miles away. Her world had just been shattered, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. All these years of searching, all the time she had spent imagining the moment she'd finally find her mother, and it had ended in devastation. "That woman," Rachel began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's not my mother." James shook his head, clearly unsure of what to say. "We'll get answers, Rachel. Don't worry. We'll figure this out." But Rachel wasn't so sure. The woman had been so certain, so cold when she told her that she wasn't the one who abandoned her. Was she lying? Or was there some truth hidden in those words? Before she could respond, a producer from the show appeared, interrupting their conversation. "Rachel, we need to get you to the green room. We have a private area set up for you to rest and talk things through. Please, just come with us." Rachel hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to face anyone. She wanted to be alone, to process everything. But the producer was insistent. "You'll be okay, just for a little while, and then we'll get you home." She nodded slowly, not knowing what else to do, and followed the producer off the stage. The cameras were no longer on her, but the heavy feeling in her chest didn't go away. The green room was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded in the studio. She sat down on a couch, her body slumping as the weight of the situation hit her. She thought about the words that woman had said, "Find your real mother. She's still alive." Rachel's breath hitched as a new flood of emotions washed over her. Could it really be true? Was her birth mother still out there, waiting to be found? If the woman in the studio wasn't her mother, who was? As Rachel tried to calm her racing thoughts, the door to the green room opened, and a familiar face stepped inside. It was Sophia, her best friend. Sophia had been there through every step of Rachel's journey, supporting her through the highs and lows. She had flown in from out of state just to be with Rachel during this critical moment. "Sophia," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "What do I do now? What if I've been looking for the wrong person all along?" Sophia sat down beside her, taking Rachel's hand in hers. "We'll figure this out, Rachel. We'll find the answers. Don't give up now." Rachel nodded, though a small part of her was starting to doubt if it was even worth continuing the search. What if she had been chasing shadows all these years? What if the truth was just too painful to bear? The sound of a phone vibrating on the table startled them both. Rachel glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered the call. "Hello?" Rachel said, her voice still shaky. A deep, unfamiliar voice responded on the other end. "Is this Rachel? I know you're probably confused right now, but I need you to listen. I have information about your real mother." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Could this be a sign? She squeezed Sophia's hand, her mind racing with questions. "Who is this? How do you know about my mother?" The voice on the other end paused for a moment, as if weighing the situation. "I can't say much over the phone, but you need to meet me. I have something you need to see. Something that will answer all your questions." Rachel's mind spun. Could this be the key to everything? Could this stranger be the one to lead her to the truth? "Where are you?" she demanded, her voice filled with urgency. "I'll send you the details," the voice replied. "Just be careful. There's more to this than you know." Before Rachel could ask anything else, the line went dead. She looked at Sophia, her face a mix of hope and confusion. "What do I do now?" she whispered. Sophia squeezed her hand tighter. "You go. You have to go. This could be your chance to find the truth." Rachel nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. Her real mother was out there, and no matter how painful the truth might be, she had to know. She had to find out who she really was. The air around her felt heavy as she stood up, her mind racing with what the future might hold. She could feel the weight of everything that had happened in the past hour pressing down on her, but there was a new fire in her chest. She wasn't giving up, not now. Rachel grabbed her coat and turned to Sophia. "I'm going. I need to know the truth." Sophia smiled, her eyes full of concern. "I'll come with you. Whatever happens, I'm here for you." As they stepped out of the green room and into the bustling backstage area, Rachel felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. She didn't know who was waiting for her, or what they had to tell her, but she was ready to face it. Whatever it took. Rachel and Sophia walked briskly through the backstage corridor, the heavy echo of their footsteps seeming louder with every passing second. Rachel's mind was consumed by the strange phone call she had just received. The voice on the other end had sounded urgent, like it knew something crucial, something that could change everything for Rachel. But who was this person? How did they know so much about her? She glanced at Sophia, who walked beside her with a reassuring smile, though Rachel could see the concern in her eyes. "You're sure about this?" Sophia asked quietly, her hand still gently resting on Rachel's arm. "You don't know who this is, Rachel. It could be a setup, or worse, someone trying to hurt you." Rachel hesitated for a moment. The fear in Sophia's voice mirrored the swirling doubt in her own mind. "I know, but I need to know. I can't stop now." They reached the exit doors of the studio, where a sleek black car was parked outside, waiting for them. The tinted windows made it hard to see who was inside, but Rachel knew this was the rendezvous. She had no choice but to trust that this was the right step forward, despite every instinct in her telling her to be cautious. The driver, a man in a black suit, opened the door for them without a word. Rachel climbed in first, with Sophia close behind. The moment the door shut, the car sped off, the city lights blurring past the window. The tension in the air was thick, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something big, something life-changing, was just around the corner. But the thought of what she might discover kept her moving forward. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked, her voice breaking the silence. The driver's eyes met hers briefly in the rearview mirror before he answered, his tone flat. "The location will be sent to you in a few minutes. Just be patient." The words sent a chill down Rachel's spine. Who were these people? And why were they being so secretive? She felt like she was stepping into a world far beyond what she had ever imagined. Like someone was pulling the strings of her life, and she was just a pawn in their game. As the car continued to speed through the streets, Rachel's phone buzzed. She pulled it out of her bag and saw an encrypted message flash across the screen. "Meet at 12th Avenue and Maple Street. Someone will be waiting for you. Don't bring anyone else." Rachel's heart raced as she stared at the message. The instructions were clear. They wanted her alone. She glanced at Sophia, who caught her eye and raised an eyebrow. "You have to go alone," Rachel said softly, her voice laced with uncertainty. They're telling me not to bring anyone else. Sophia didn't look happy about it, but she nodded in understanding. I'll stay here. Just be careful, okay? Don't do anything rash. Rachel gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I will. I promise. The car took a sharp turn onto a quieter street, and the driver slowed down as they neared the intersection Rachel had been directed to. The area was dark and seemingly deserted, with only a few dim streetlights illuminating the pavement. The car came to a stop at the corner of 12th Avenue and Maple Street, and the driver turned to face her. Get out, he said coldly, his eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. Rachel's hands shook as she opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. Sophia's voice echoed in her mind, urging her to be cautious, but there was no turning back now. The message had said to trust them, and she had no other choice. The driver pulled away without another word, leaving Rachel standing alone on the street corner. Her breath came out in visible clouds, and she shivered as she looked around. The street was eerily quiet, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She checked her phone again, expecting some sort of further instruction, but there was nothing. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the faint light of a nearby street lamp. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the woman. It was the same cold woman from the TV show, the one who had claimed she wasn't her mother. You, Rachel gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? The woman didn't speak right away. She simply stood there, her eyes piercing through Rachel as if weighing her very soul. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice low and gravelly. I told you to find your real mother, didn't I? She said, her tone still as detached as it had been on the show. Well, now you've found me, but I'm not the one you should be looking for. The answers are buried deep, and I'm the only one who can help you find them. Rachel's confusion deepened. Why didn't you tell me the truth on TV? She demanded. Why all the lies? Why the games? The woman stepped closer, her face now visible in the dim light. Because you're not ready, she said cryptically, and because someone is watching. Someone powerful. You've been digging into things you shouldn't. Your real mother. She's not what you think. Rachel's head was spinning. What was this woman talking about? What did she mean? Someone is watching. Why are you telling me this now? Rachel asked, her voice cracking with emotion. Why the cryptic messages? Just tell me what I need to know. The woman looked around cautiously before stepping even closer. Because if you don't understand what's at stake, you'll be in danger. You and everyone around you. Rachel's stomach churned. What danger? What do you mean? The woman hesitated for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Your mother is more than just a woman. She's connected to something bigger, something dangerous, and it's been hidden from you for a reason. Before Rachel could respond, a loud noise echoed through the alley, cutting off the woman's words. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Rachel froze in place. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and moved with a strange, purposeful grace. The woman beside Rachel stiffened, her eyes narrowing in alarm. Leave now, the woman said urgently, her voice shaking. You don't know what you've just stepped into. Rachel's mind raced as the tall figure approached, his intentions unclear. Was this the danger the woman had warned her about? Or was something else happening? With a sudden movement, the woman turned and fled into the shadows, leaving Rachel standing in the cold, feeling more alone than ever. Rachel stood frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest as the mysterious figure advanced toward her. The woman who had just been speaking to her, the one who had claimed to know something about her real mother, had disappeared into the darkness, leaving Rachel alone to face whatever was coming. She wanted to run, to hide, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. The figure's steps grew louder as he approached. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and his face was hidden in the shadows. His movements were calculated and deliberate, and Rachel felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Who was he? Was he part of the dangerous world the woman had warned her about? Or was he something else entirely? Who are you? Rachel finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. She forced herself to stand her ground, though every instinct in her body screamed for her to flee. The figure stopped just a few feet away, his shadow swallowing her whole. He didn't answer right away, only observing her with an intensity that made Rachel's skin crawl. It was as though he was waiting for her to speak again, for her to reveal something he already knew. Rachel swallowed hard. "I don't know what you want, but I won't let you intimidate me." The man's lips curled into a faint, almost mocking smile. "You think you have a choice in this?" he said, his voice low and steady. "You've already made your choice by being here." Rachel's stomach twisted into knots. Was this some sort of trap? Had she been lured into this situation from the very beginning? The woman who had told her to find her real mother, the cryptic warnings, the mysterious phone call. It was all starting to feel like a game, a dangerous game, and Rachel had no idea who was playing her or why. "Why are you following me?" Rachel demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "What do you want from me?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, holding it out toward Rachel. She stared at it for a moment before reluctantly reaching for it, her fingers brushing against his hand as she took the envelope. It was thick and sealed with a wax mark she didn't recognize. "Open it," the man instructed, his voice cold. Rachel's hand shook as she tore open the envelope, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside, she found a single piece of paper, folded neatly. She unfolded it, revealing a set of coordinates and a time. Early the next morning. The location was familiar to her. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place she had passed by many times but had never ventured near. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression remained impassive as he spoke. "A meeting. You'll find what you're looking for there." Rachel's head spun. Was this another lead in her search for the truth? Or was it another trap designed to pull her deeper into a web of lies? She had no way of knowing, but the only thing she did know was that she had come too far to turn back now. "If I go there, will I finally learn the truth?" she asked, locking eyes with the man. The man nodded, though his gaze was unreadable. "That depends on you. The truth has a way of revealing itself, but only to those who are prepared to face it." Rachel wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but she knew that was pointless. This man wasn't going to give her anything more than what was written on that piece of paper. He turned abruptly, as if he had said all he needed to say, and began to walk away. His footsteps echoed in the quiet street, growing fainter as he disappeared into the darkness. Rachel stood there, holding the envelope in her hand, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who was that man? What was he really trying to tell her? And what was waiting for her at the warehouse? She looked at the coordinates once again. The place seemed to hold some sort of significance, but she couldn't figure out why. Why had this man chosen it? And what had the woman meant when she said the answers were buried deep? "Rachel." Sophia's voice broke through the silence, and Rachel turned to see her friend standing at the corner of the alley, her face filled with concern. "Are you okay? What's going on? Who was that guy?" Rachel glanced down at the envelope, still in her hands, and then back up at Sophia. Her stomach was in knots, and she knew there was no turning back now. This was her chance to uncover the truth about her mother. The real truth, no matter how dangerous or painful it might be. "I don't know," Rachel said, her voice shaky, "but I'm going to find out. There's something I have to do." Sophia stepped closer, her face full of worry. "Rachel, this feels wrong. I'm worried about you. We should go to the police, or at least get someone else involved." But Rachel shook her head. "No, I have to do this. I can't keep running away from the truth. I need to go to that warehouse tomorrow. Sophia, I need to know what's there." Sophia hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to protect her friend and understanding how important this was to Rachel. Finally, she nodded, though her concern was still evident. "I'll go with you. I'm not letting you do this alone." Rachel smiled, grateful for Sophia's support, but she also knew deep down that this was something she had to do on her own. The truth had always been just out of reach, but now, with the envelope in her hand and the coordinates on the paper, it felt like the end of the journey was finally within her grasp. She couldn't let fear stop her now, not when everything she had been searching for was just a step away. The next morning came too quickly. Rachel barely slept, the anticipation and anxiety keeping her awake. She dressed in dark, comfortable clothes, determined to blend in and avoid drawing attention. Sophia had insisted on coming along, but Rachel knew that the moment she stepped into that warehouse, it would be her alone who would face whatever truth awaited her there. The drive to the outskirts of town felt surreal. As they approached the warehouse, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something that would change her life forever. She didn't know what she would find there, who would be waiting for her, or what kind of answers she would get, but she couldn't turn back. Not now. The warehouse loomed ahead, a shadowy structure standing in the middle of an abandoned industrial area. The silence was overwhelming. The air felt thick with tension as they pulled into the parking lot, their tires crunching on the gravel. Rachel opened the car door and stepped out, her heart racing. The building looked deserted, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Sophia stood beside her, her face pale, her eyes filled with worry. "I'll be right here," Sophia said, her voice shaky. "I don't want to leave you, but I can't go inside. Just be careful." Rachel nodded, trying to reassure her friend, but her own nerves were getting the best of her. This was it. Everything she had been searching for was here. As Rachel approached the door of the warehouse, her hand trembling on the cold metal handle, she heard a faint sound behind her, a car pulling up, tires crunching on the gravel. She froze. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the sound of the car pulling up behind her. Her pulse raced, and her stomach churned with anxiety. She hadn't expected anyone else to be here, especially not now. Who could it be? Was someone else trying to get to the truth before she could? The car came to a stop, its headlights blinding for a moment before it shut off. The engine's hum died down, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the surrounding trees. Rachel instinctively took a step back, her hand still hovering over the door handle, her mind racing. Was this a trap? Had she walked right into someone else's plan? Sophia's voice broke the silence from a few steps behind. "Rachel, what's going on? Should we go back?" Rachel hesitated. Her gut told her to move forward, to keep going, but something in her was holding her back. She glanced over her shoulder at Sophia, who looked increasingly worried. Before Rachel could answer, a figure stepped out of the car and into the dim light. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the person. It was the same woman who had been on the talk show, the one who had initially claimed she wasn't Rachel's mother. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. What was she doing here? What did she want now? The woman didn't approach immediately. Instead, she stood a few feet away, watching Rachel closely. Her face was hard to read, but Rachel could see a flicker of something in her eyes, something that almost looked like regret. Rachel swallowed hard. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the panic swirling inside her. "I thought you wanted me to find my real mother. What's going on?" The woman's lips pressed together in a thin line. She glanced at Sophia, who had stepped up beside Rachel, her face full of concern. Then, without answering the question, she spoke. "You shouldn't be here. Not like this. You're in danger." Rachel's mind spun. The warning she had heard from the woman before came rushing back. "What do you mean, danger?" Rachel asked, her voice tense. "Who's after me?" The woman's eyes darkened. "It's not just you. There are people who want to keep the truth hidden. You've already uncovered more than you realize, Rachel. The questions you've been asking, they've attracted the wrong kind of attention." Rachel shook her head, the confusion mounting with every word. "What truth? What have I uncovered?" The woman stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Rachel's. "You're closer than you think, but there are some things you need to know before you go any further." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What things?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the dark parking lot. It was clear she was conflicted about whether to continue. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke in a low voice. "The truth about your mother. It's more complicated than you know. She didn't leave you because she didn't care. She was forced to make a choice. And now, you're part of something much bigger than just a mother-daughter reunion." Rachel's breath caught. "What do you mean? What kind of choice?" The woman's gaze hardened, as though she was weighing whether or not to reveal the next part of the story. "I can't say too much right now, but you need to understand that the people who've been pulling the strings, they're dangerous. And they're still watching you. If you go inside that warehouse, you may not come out the same." Rachel felt like she was drowning in questions. Who were these people? Why was her mother involved in something so dangerous? And why had the woman just appeared out of nowhere, warning her of something she didn't understand? The woman turned toward the warehouse. If you want to find the truth, you have to be ready for what comes next. But you have to do it alone. Trust no one else. Not even me. Rachel stared at her, torn between wanting to run away from this chaotic mess and the overwhelming pull to uncover what had been hidden from her for so long. She had always felt something was off, that there was more to her story than she had been told. But now, it seemed like the truth was buried beneath layers of secrets, lies, and danger. "I'm ready," Rachel said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I need to know the truth." The woman gave her a long look, then nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. "Then go. But remember what I said. Trust no one." With that, she turned and walked back toward her car, leaving Rachel standing there with 1,000 unanswered questions and a heart full of uncertainty. Sophia, who had been silently observing the entire exchange, walked up to Rachel. "What did she say? What's going on?" Rachel glanced at her friend, her mind still racing. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. Whatever she was about to walk into, she couldn't do it with Sophia by her side. It was too dangerous. "I have to go alone," Rachel said quietly, her voice heavy. "She said it's the only way I'll get the truth." Sophia frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. "Rachel, please. This doesn't feel right. I don't think you should go inside there." Rachel placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. I have to. I have to know what's happening. I can't keep running from the truth." Sophia hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to protect her friend and understanding the weight of Rachel's determination. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, but be careful. I'll be right here waiting for you, no matter what happens." With one last look at her friend, Rachel turned toward the warehouse. Her legs felt heavy as she approached the door, but there was no turning back. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. As she stepped inside, the darkness swallowed her whole. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the hollow space, and the air smelled stale and musty. She couldn't see much at first, but as her eyes adjusted, she noticed the faint outlines of old machinery and abandoned crates. The warehouse seemed empty, but there was a strange feeling in the air, like she was being watched. Rachel took a deep breath and moved forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know what was waiting for her, but she was ready to face whatever it was. She had come too far to back out now. Suddenly, she heard a sound behind her, a quiet scraping noise followed by a low murmur of voices. Rachel's breath caught in her throat, and she turned quickly, her heart racing. There was someone else in the warehouse, someone who had been waiting for her. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, sharp and steady, growing louder as Rachel spun around to face the shadows behind her. She could feel her pulse thumping in her throat, each beat vibrating through her chest. The air seemed to grow colder, thicker, as if the warehouse itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall and imposing, his face barely visible in the dim light. His silhouette was familiar in a way that sent a chill crawling up Rachel's spine. She had seen him before, in the background of her mind, in flashes of memories she couldn't fully piece together. Her heart pounded harder as he took another step closer, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low, smooth, almost hypnotic. Rachel's hand instinctively reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she gripped it tightly. But her mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that had led her here. Who was this man? What did he want with her? "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why are you following me?" The man smirked, a cruel twist to his lips. "You've been asking the wrong questions, Rachel. And now you're here, trying to dig up the past. But you have no idea what you're really getting into." Rachel's mind spun. What did he mean? Was this man part of the same group that had been hiding the truth about her mother? She took a step back, her eyes darting around the dark warehouse, trying to make sense of the shadows. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet were frozen in place. She couldn't let this moment slip away. I want answers, Rachel said, her voice firm despite the fear creeping up her spine. Who are you? And what do you know about my mother? The man's eyes flickered with something. Surprise? Amusement? It was impossible to tell. He took another step forward, his movements calculated, predatory. I know more than you think, he said, his voice dropping lower, the air thick with menace. And the truth you're looking for. It's not something you're ready to handle. There's a reason it's been kept from you all these years. Rachel shook her head, frustration boiling inside her. I've been lied to my whole life. I need to know the truth. The man's eyes darkened. The truth? He echoed, almost as if the word itself tasted bitter. There's no such thing as the truth anymore, Rachel. There are only people who control the stories. People who choose what you see, what you believe. Your mother, your real mother, has been part of something you'll never understand. Rachel's stomach twisted as his words sank in. What do you mean? What's so dangerous about her? About me? The man took one more step forward, closing the distance between them. Your mother was involved in something far beyond what you've imagined. She's tied to an organization, one that has been keeping an eye on you for years. And you, Rachel, you're part of something much bigger than you realize. A game you've been playing without even knowing the rules. Rachel's head swam as his words hit her like a physical blow. She had always felt that her search for answers was bigger than just finding her mother. But this was something else. Something much darker. I don't understand, Rachel whispered, her voice shaking. What do you want from me? The man smiled again, a cruel smile that made Rachel's skin crawl. I don't want anything from you. But there are others who do. Others who are far more dangerous. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't find out the truth. Rachel's eyes widened. Who? Who are these people? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another step back, as if weighing his next words carefully. You'll meet them soon enough, he said, his voice now laced with an unsettling calmness. But be warned, Rachel. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. And once you know everything, you won't be able to walk away. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine as the weight of his words sank in. The truth wasn't just something she wanted. It was something that would change her life forever. And maybe not in the way she had hoped. The man turned and walked toward the back of the warehouse, his footsteps echoing off the walls. You're not ready for this, he called over his shoulder, his voice fading into the distance. But you'll find out soon enough. The truth is already coming for you, Rachel. Rachel stood still, her mind reeling. She had thought she was on the path to discovery, to finding the answers she had longed for. But now, it felt as if the whole world was closing in on her, and she was just a pawn in a game she didn't understand. And then, as the man's footsteps grew quieter, a voice broke through the silence, one that she recognized immediately. Rachel. She spun around, her heart skipping a beat. Standing at the entrance to the warehouse was Sophia, her face pale and full of fear. What's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. Who was that man? What did he say to you? Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't tell Sophia everything. Not yet. Not until she knew more. But there was one thing she knew for sure now. The search for the truth was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. I don't know, Rachel said quietly, her voice shaking, but I think I'm closer to the truth than I've ever been. Sophia's eyes widened with concern. Rachel, we need to get out of here. This place doesn't feel right. Rachel looked around the warehouse, the sense of unease settling deep in her bones. She wanted to leave, to run as far away from this nightmare as possible. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close to the answers she had been seeking for so long. I can't, Rachel said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I have to keep going. Sophia's face twisted with worry, but she nodded, stepping closer to Rachel. Then I'm going with you. No matter what happens. Rachel turned back to the shadows where the man had disappeared. She didn't know what was waiting for her, or what she was about to uncover, but she had come this far. There was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and Rachel was going to find it, no matter the cost. The air inside the warehouse was heavy, thick with the remnants of dust and years of abandonment. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she stood with Sophia, staring into the depths of the shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly within the large, empty space. Her mind raced with questions, each one more pressing than the last. What had that man meant by his cryptic warnings? What was he trying to tell her? Who were these dangerous people, and how was her mother involved? Sophia's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "We can't keep standing here like this," she said, her voice tense. "We need a plan, Rachel. We need to figure out what to do next." Rachel nodded, though her mind was a blur. She couldn't think straight, but she knew one thing. She had come too far to stop now. The truth was within her reach, and she wouldn't let fear keep her from uncovering it. "We need to find out what's in this warehouse," Rachel said, her voice shaky but determined. "Whatever he was talking about, it's here. I can feel it." Sophia glanced around, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. "You're sure about this?" Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't have a choice. If we leave now, we might never get another chance." Sophia hesitated but nodded, her expression conflicted. "All right, but be careful. Something doesn't feel right about this place." The two of them moved deeper into the warehouse, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The place felt abandoned, but there was an eerie sense of activity lingering in the air, like someone had been here recently. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that the shadows in the corners of the warehouse were hiding something, watching them. They passed rows of old machinery, some covered in sheets, others rusted beyond repair. The faint light from the single bulb hanging above them barely illuminated the vast space. Rachel's eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the place. What was she looking for? What had brought her here? "Look," Sophia whispered, pointing toward a set of large metal doors at the far end of the warehouse. "Those doors don't look like they belong in here." Rachel squinted, her heart skipping a beat. Sophia was right. The doors were newer than everything else in the warehouse, their metal surface clean and unmarked. They seemed out of place, as if someone had deliberately hidden them away. "Let's check it out," Rachel said, her voice firm. She felt an intense pull toward those doors, like they were the key to everything. As they approached, Rachel felt her anxiety surge. The closer they got, the more certain she became that the answers she was seeking were hidden behind those doors. With a deep breath, she pushed the cold metal door open. The creaking sound echoed through the warehouse, and for a split second, she thought she heard something. Footsteps, faint but distinct. Rachel turned to Sophia, her voice urgent. "Stay behind me. Whatever's in there, we don't know what we're dealing with." Sophia nodded, her face pale but resolute. She followed closely behind as Rachel stepped through the door, into what seemed like a much smaller, confined space. The room they entered was dimly lit, but it was clear that it had been used for something important. Tables lined the walls, cluttered with old documents, photographs, and various pieces of equipment. But it wasn't the clutter that caught Rachel's eye. It was the single item sitting in the center of the room. On a table at the far end of the room was a large, sealed envelope. It looked out of place in the midst of all the chaos, almost as if it was waiting for her. Rachel felt a strange sense of recognition as she walked toward the table, every step heavy with anticipation. She reached out, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the envelope. It was heavy, and it felt like there was something important inside, something that could change everything. The seal on the envelope was unbroken, but it didn't look like it had been placed there recently. The wax was old, cracked, and worn. "Rachel," Sophia said, her voice low and uncertain, "this is getting really strange. Should we really be doing this?" Rachel glanced back at Sophia, her eyes filled with determination. "We've come this far. We have to know what's inside." With a deep breath, Rachel carefully broke the seal, the wax cracking under her fingers. She opened the envelope, pulling out a single piece of paper, its edges yellowed with age. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the contents. The words on the page were typed in neat, precise letters. "Rachel, if you are reading this, it means you've finally come to understand the truth. Your mother's involvement with us is only the beginning of a much larger story. Everything you know has been a lie, and the path ahead will not be easy. But you must continue. You are the key to everything. Meet me at the old church on 7th Street at midnight. The answers you seek are there, but beware. There are forces working against you. Trust no one, not even the people who claim to be your allies. Your mother's past is intertwined with a secret organization that has been pulling the strings behind the scenes. You are more than you think. The truth will either make you stronger or destroy you. A friend. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she reread the note, her mind spinning with the implications. Who had left this message? Who knew about her mother's connection to a secret organization? And why was she suddenly the key to everything? Who could have written this? Rachel muttered, her voice shaking with disbelief. What is this all about? Sophia stepped closer, peering over Rachel's shoulder at the note. This is getting out of control. We need to leave. We need to tell someone. Go to the authorities. This is way too dangerous. Rachel didn't respond at first. She was too caught up in the words of the note, the haunting message that seemed to confirm everything she had suspected. Her mother wasn't just a woman who had abandoned her. She was part of something much bigger, something that was still out there, waiting for her. I can't leave, Rachel said quietly, more to herself than to Sophia. I have to find out who these people are, who my mother really was. Sophia reached out, grabbing Rachel's arm gently. Please, Rachel, think about what you're doing. This isn't just about you anymore. If you go any further, you don't know who you can trust. These people have been hiding this from you for a reason. Rachel pulled away from Sophia, her mind made up. I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to find out what it all means, no matter what. But as she turned to leave the room, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open behind them froze her in place. A voice, soft but unmistakable, echoed through the room. You shouldn't have come here, Rachel. Rachel's blood ran cold as she slowly turned around. The voice echoed in the small room, sending a shiver through Rachel's spine. It was cold, calculated, and laced with an unsettling familiarity. She turned slowly, her heart racing as her eyes scanned the shadows at the far end of the room. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, reached her ears, but the figure emerging from the darkness was still just a silhouette. Who are you? Rachel demanded, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her legs felt like lead as she took a step back, Sophia's fearful eyes watching her every move. The figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a tall man dressed in a dark suit. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but Rachel immediately recognized the intensity in his eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her, as though they could see into her very soul. You don't remember me, do you? The man said, his voice low and smooth, sending a chill down Rachel's spine. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Something about the man's voice, his presence, felt hauntingly familiar. She searched her mind, trying to place him, but nothing came to her. She couldn't remember ever meeting him before, yet his words stirred something deep inside her, a memory she couldn't quite grasp. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. Do I know you? The man's lips curled into a slight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. You will soon enough. Rachel's heart began to pound harder, fear creeping in. What do you want from me? He took another step forward, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. I'm here to make sure you don't make a mistake, Rachel. You're looking for answers, but some truths are too dangerous to find. Sophia stepped up beside Rachel, her voice shaking with concern. Who are you? What do you want with her? The man didn't answer Sophia. Instead, his gaze locked onto Rachel, his eyes dark and unblinking. You've been asking the wrong questions. Your mother. She was never meant to be found. But you, he paused, his gaze flickering briefly to Sophia, then back to Rachel. You've stirred up things you don't understand. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I'm not afraid of the truth. I want to know who my mother really is. I've waited long enough. The man's expression remained unreadable. That's your choice. But you should understand this. Every decision you make from here on out will have consequences. Rachel's mind raced. Who was this man? What was he talking about? It seemed like he knew everything about her mother. But how? And why had he been watching her? Why are you telling me all of this now? Rachel asked, her voice rising with frustration. What do you want from me? The man took another slow step toward her, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Your mother's past is more dangerous than you realize. It's not something you can just walk away from. Rachel's eyes narrowed. I don't care about the danger. I want answers. The man's lips twitched again, but it wasn't a smile. Then you're already too far gone. You've stepped into a world that has no mercy. Sophia tugged at Rachel's sleeve. We need to get out of here, Rachel. This isn't safe. But Rachel couldn't move. The man's presence, the tension in the air, was suffocating her. But the pull to uncover the truth was stronger. She had to know what he was talking about. If you know so much about my mother, Rachel began, her voice shaking but determined, then tell me where she is. Tell me why she left me. The man's face hardened. Your mother didn't leave you. She was forced to make a choice. And that choice was never supposed to involve you. The words hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. Forced to make a choice? What was he talking about? What do you mean? She asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of her voice. What choice? The man's gaze darkened, and for a moment, Rachel thought he might answer. But then, the sound of footsteps from outside the room made him pause. His eyes darted toward the door, his expression shifting to one of sudden alertness. They're here, he muttered under his breath. Rachel's heart raced. Who's here? But before she could get an answer, the door to the small room burst open with a loud crash. The man turned sharply, stepping quickly toward the shadows as several figures filed in. They were all dressed in dark clothing, their faces hidden behind masks, their movements swift and coordinated. Sophia gasped and took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. What is going on, Rachel? The man didn't answer. Instead, he seemed to melt into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Rachel's mind spun. These masked figures, the way they moved, it was clear they were part of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. Had they been watching her all along? Were they part of the same organization the man had mentioned? One of the masked figures stepped forward, a figure taller than the rest. He didn't say a word at first, but his gaze locked onto Rachel, cold and calculating. You're Rachel, aren't you? The man said, his voice muffled by the mask. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts were racing, trying to process everything. This wasn't just about finding her mother anymore. This was something else entirely. Something she wasn't prepared for. The figure stepped closer, his body language menacing. You've uncovered things you shouldn't have, he said, his voice low. And now you're in our way. Rachel's blood ran cold. What do you want from me? She demanded, her voice shaking. The masked figure reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing a button. Suddenly, a map appeared on the screen of the device, showing a location Rachel didn't recognize. Your mother's legacy, he said, his tone dark. It's not just about her. It's about you now. You've been marked, Rachel. The only question is, will you embrace it or run away? Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the map. The location was unknown, but it felt like the final piece to the puzzle. The final step she needed to take to get closer to the truth. But was she ready to face what lay ahead? The man's voice snapped her back to reality. We'll be watching you. Don't make the wrong move. The masked figures turned, leaving as quickly as they had come, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Rachel and Sophia alone once again. Rachel stood frozen, staring at the device in her hand, her mind racing. She didn't know what to make of the threat, of the cryptic message about her mother's legacy. But one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it was far bigger than she had ever imagined. And there was no turning back now. The silence that followed felt suffocating, almost as though the entire warehouse was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Rachel stood there, the device still in her hand, the map glowing softly in the dim light. Her fingers were numb, but her mind was working overtime, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. Who were those people? Why had they come for her? And what exactly was her mother involved in? Sophia's voice broke through her thoughts, shaky but filled with concern. Rachel, what was that? Who were they? And what is that map showing you? Rachel swallowed, her throat dry, her hands trembling as she stared at the screen. The location was unfamiliar, a small dot marked in the middle of nowhere. But it wasn't just the location that stood out. It was the coordinates themselves. They were oddly precise, as if they had been meant for her, as if someone had been waiting for her to come to this exact point. I don't know, Sophia, Rachel said quietly, her voice hollow. But whatever this is, it's far bigger than I thought. Those people, they knew about me, about my mother. They said I've been marked. Sophia took a step closer, her brow furrowed with worry. Marked? What does that even mean? Rachel could barely answer. The words the masked figure had said echoed in her mind. Your mother's legacy. It's not just about her. It's about you now. The weight of the statement hung heavily in the air between them. Rachel didn't know what it meant, but she could feel the gravity of it pulling her deeper into whatever this was. And there was no turning back now. I don't know what it means, Rachel finally said, her voice barely a whisper. But I need to find out. I need to go to that place. Sophia shook her head, her eyes pleading. Rachel, this is insane. These people, whoever they are dangerous. And now they're watching you. We don't even know what they want with you. You can't go there alone. Rachel looked at her friend, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. Sophia was scared, and Rachel didn't blame her. This entire situation was spiraling out of control. But the need to uncover the truth, to understand her mother's past, was overwhelming. I can't just run away from this, Sophia, Rachel said, her voice stronger now, though still filled with doubt. I have to go. I've come too far to stop now. Sophia hesitated, clearly torn. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping in resignation. I don't like this, Rachel, but if you're going, I'm going with you. You don't have to face this alone. Rachel smiled gratefully, though the anxiety in her chest didn't lessen. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere. I don't want to go alone either. But we have to be careful. We don't know who we're dealing with. With a final glance at the device, Rachel slipped it into her pocket and turned toward the exit. They had to leave now. The sooner they got to the location, the sooner they could start getting answers. As they made their way out of the warehouse, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was as if every step they took was under surveillance, as if the danger was closing in on them. They stepped into the cool night air, the city lights casting long shadows on the empty street. The world outside seemed so normal, so unaware of the chaos Rachel had just walked into. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to focus on what lay ahead. Sophia, walking beside her, glanced at her with an expression of quiet determination. So, what's the plan? We're going to that place, right? Rachel nodded, pulling out her phone to check the map. The coordinates were only a few miles away. It wasn't far, but it felt like they were heading straight into the heart of something far bigger than they could understand. I'll drive, Rachel said, already making her way to her car. She wasn't sure if it was the right decision, but she couldn't waste any more time. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it seemed, but she couldn't turn back. As they drove through the quiet streets, the tension between them was palpable. Sophia was clearly anxious, her hands gripping the seat tightly, her gaze flickering nervously from the road to Rachel. Rachel could see the worry in her friend's eyes, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the answers were just a few miles away. The night seemed to drag on, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. The road stretched on endlessly, the dim lights of the city fading behind them as they neared the outskirts. Finally, they reached the location. The place was exactly as it had appeared on the map. Isolated, far from any main roads, tucked away in a small valley surrounded by trees. A sense of unease settled in the pit of Rachel's stomach as she parked the car. The air was thick with tension, and Rachel could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. But now, standing in front of the nondescript building, she wasn't sure she was ready for what she was about to uncover. Sophia looked at her, fear and uncertainty written all over her face. Are you sure about this, Rachel? We don't know what we're walking into. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had come this far, and she couldn't turn back now. We don't have a choice. This is the only way. They stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath their feet as they walked toward the entrance. The building was old, its walls cracked and weathered, the windows dark and empty. But there was something about it. something that made Rachel feel as though this was the place where everything would finally make sense. Or, perhaps, where everything would fall apart. As they reached the door, Rachel hesitated. The air around her felt charged, as if something was about to happen. Her heart raced, her breath shallow. She had no idea what was waiting for her inside, but she knew it was something that would change everything. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The creak of the hinges echoed in the empty space, and as they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. A voice from the shadows greeted them. "You're finally here." Rachel's blood ran cold. She didn't recognize the voice, but it sounded familiar, like something from a dream or a nightmare. Rachel's heart thudded loudly in her chest as the voice echoed through the dimly lit room. She and Sophia stood motionless, eyes scanning the shadows for the source of the voice. The door had slammed shut behind them with a force that made the walls seem to tremble. There was no turning back now. The voice, low, almost whispering, spoke again, this time much closer. "You've been looking for answers, Rachel, but I'm afraid the answers you seek are not as simple as you think." Rachel stiffened, the chill of realization creeping down her spine. Someone was here, watching them. She turned slowly, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, her mind racing. She was about to find out what had been hidden from her, but what if the truth was more dangerous than she could ever have imagined? From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but Rachel could make out the sharp, calculating features beneath it. His eyes glinted with an eerie knowing, as if he had been waiting for her all along. He was tall, his movements deliberate and slow as he came closer. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever he was about to say, but there was no turning back now. The figure paused, a small, almost imperceptible smile curling at the corners of his lips. "I'm someone who knows your mother's secrets," he said. "And now, you're going to learn them too." Sophia's hand gripped Rachel's arm tightly. "Rachel, we don't have to do this. We should just leave. We don't know who he is." But Rachel didn't move. She couldn't. Everything she had fought for, every question she had ever asked, had led her to this moment. She had to face it. "Why have you been following me?" Rachel demanded. "What do you know about my mother? Who are you?" The man looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Your mother, Rachel, was part of an organization that has been operating in the shadows for decades. They are not just a group. They are a system that controls much more than you could possibly imagine." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. An organization? Her mother had been part of something like that? She had always thought her mother had abandoned her out of selfishness or fear. But now it seemed there was something else, something far darker. "Your mother was never meant to be found," the man continued, his voice growing colder. "She made choices long before you were born. Choices that have shaped your life in ways you don't even understand. The truth you've been seeking isn't just about finding her. It's about understanding what she was a part of, and what you, Rachel, are now a part of as well." Rachel's head spun as the weight of his words sank in. She wasn't just looking for answers about her mother. She was uncovering something far more dangerous. But what exactly did he mean by what you are now a part of? The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Rachel's. "You've already made the decision by coming here. You were marked the moment you started digging into your mother's past. And now, there's no turning back." Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but the man raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't try to fight it. You're connected to this organization whether you like it or not. Your bloodline ties you to them in ways you don't even realize. And now, you have two choices. You can accept your place in this world, or you can try to run from it. But either way, you're already part of something much bigger than yourself." Rachel felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. Everything she thought she knew, the simple truth about her mother's abandonment, was now a lie. She wasn't just seeking closure. She was at the center of a web that stretched far beyond her, and the choices she made now could determine her future, and possibly the future of others. Sophia spoke up, her voice trembling. "What do you want from us? Why are you telling Rachel this?" The man's gaze shifted to Sophia, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I'm not telling you anything, Sophia. Rachel is the one who needs to understand. She's the one who has a part to play in this. Rachel's thoughts raced. She was part of something. Her mother had been part of something. What did this mean for her? What did this mean for the future? Was there a way to escape this fate? Or was she forever bound to whatever this mysterious organization was? Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through her thoughts, a loud, insistent beeping. The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device, and looked at it briefly before his expression hardened. You've been found, he said quietly, almost to himself. It's time to make your decision, Rachel. The people who have been watching you are closing in. If you want to survive, you have to choose who you align with, us or them. Rachel's stomach twisted in fear. Who were them? Who could possibly be worse than the menacing figure in front of her? But before she could ask, the sound of engines roared outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming. They're here, the man muttered, his voice low and urgent. Rachel, your choices are running out. In that moment, everything that had been building up, the search for the truth, the unknown enemies, her mother's dark past, came to a head. Rachel's mind raced as she realized the enormity of what she was up against. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was now a player in a game that had been unfolding long before she even knew it existed. You have to make a choice, Rachel, the man said one last time, his eyes intense. But remember, there's no going back. Rachel took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking. The world around her seemed to blur as the weight of her decision pressed down on her. She turned to Sophia, who was looking at her with wide eyes, filled with concern. Then, without another word, Rachel stepped forward. The truth had led her here, and no matter how terrifying it was, she was going to see it through. The doors to the building burst open, and in the distance, she could see figures moving toward them, their faces hidden in the shadows. Rachel didn't know who they were, or what would happen next. But she knew one thing. This was her story now, and she was going to find the answers, no matter where it took her.